think we might have a few more people entering the room as we get started. But I have a few questions. I want to start off when you guys are ready. Are we getting started back together again? I know we might have a small group. They put me last in the day. I'm like, really? 3:45, 3:30? Like, going to be presenting to 4 people? Still, it's 4 people. I'm really glad you guys decided to stay. I know that there's a lot going on with the advocacy work. If you do have to get up and leave, we have some evaluations that are on every table. So if you would mind filling out an evaluation for me before you go, that would be really helpful. I want all of the positive feedback that I can get because I can't make this better if people are not honest with what they need or what I missed during the presentation. So when we ended yesterday, I had mentioned, first of all, is there anybody in the room who was not here yesterday? Yes, okay. So I'm going to let you know I'm not a stalker. I walk around the room while I'm training because I have to read lips a little bit. And so sometimes people get a little weird because they think me being from the South means that I'm just trying to get all in your space when that's not actually what I'm doing. I'm not being a space invader. I'm just making sure that I can hear you. Also, I'm not used to working with a microphone because I'm usually loud enough that that's not really needed. But they're recording all of this, so if I do come running towards you, it means you were probably saying something that somebody wants to make sure I get on the camera and on the recording. So, for all of you who were here yesterday, I want to start off with an apology. I promised you about 22 times that we were going to do an activity, and then we did no activity, and I'm really sorry about that. We kind of ran out of time. This is stuff that I'm really passionate about. I've been doing this, like I said yesterday, for about 22 years, and I've only been in TA for about 4 of that. I might be up to 23 years now. So I actually did landlord engagement on a daily basis from every way I can think to do it, whether it was to keep my clients housed, to help make sure as the case manager that I was doing the work, whether it was as a supervisor or someone building a program. I've kind of done it from all levels and at all different times and other duties as specified. So this is something that I'm really passionate about. Also, I'm really flexible. If you have a question, if you have a comment, if you have anything, raise your hand, let me know. We definitely want to hear you. I don't want to hear myself for the next hour, especially at 3:30 when all of you could fall asleep on me. So, the activity that we were going to do yesterday, we talked about a mission moment. Does anybody remember me talking about the 5-minute mission moment? And we also talked about cold calling and how you need to get that information out there and how sometimes it can be a little different when you're talking to a landlord than when you're talking to a client. I kind of did the Southern thing yesterday and said when you're doing your cold calling elevator pitch, it's the what it is, what it ain't, how you can and how you can't. So what you can provide for them, like who you are, maybe a little bit about what you can't do, but mostly we're sticking with what you have to offer, what agency you're with, as long as that's not violating someone's confidentiality. I want you guys to take about 5 minutes while we're here, and I want you to think about what would be your elevator pitch. If you were walking in to a real estate company for the first time, if you've never been there before, and you're going to go in and you're going to present information about your particular program, remembering yesterday that we said, do not go into a new landlord for the first time with a client. Your goal and your job is to build relationship, establish and maintain relationship, so that this can be a long-term process to help possibly more than one person. So let's take 2 or 3 minutes. I think there may be some scrap paper if you've got a note, like whatever. Jot down a few things about your program. And I would love it if there's anyone that would volunteer that's brave enough in the room to stand up and give their elevator pitch. Whatever that is. If somebody would be willing to do that for me, it would be great. So let's just start with that, 2 or 3 minutes, put together your elevator pitch, and then we'll come back together and discuss them. Bye. Does anybody have any questions about the activity? Nope, okay. It's Dash, right? We're having a group activity. Are you going to walk out? Are you going to leave on me? You guys did a great job. Thank you so much for speaking. Thanks. Do you think you'll be back? just a couple more minutes, and then we'll just try to see if we can get somebody to share for us to kind of tie us back to what we were talking about yesterday with the landlord engagement. Is everybody wrapping up a little bit, getting what they feel like their elevator pitch would be? Maybe another minute? So I think, the questions are up there, but basically it's what do you want them to know? What do you want the outcome of the conversation to be? And what is your ask? That's what you think of as your elevator pitch. What is your ask? So just to clarify, we're not actually in an elevator. It's if you are, well, you may be because you find landlords everywhere, but if you are calling a landlord or if you are walking into a landlord's office for the first time and you want them to work with you in your program to help people find stable housing, how do you start that relationship? I'm obviously an extrovert, so this is not hard for me, but a lot of times I have even made myself practice in front of my teenager because that can be ruthless. If you really want if you want real feedback, ask a 16-year-old. As her mother, but that's an opportunity for you if you're not used to speaking and having that moment where you literally are cold calling someone. It may take practice. Do it in front of your friend, do it in front of the dog, do it in front of the mirror, like whatever. Helping yourself say it over and over and over again makes you sound more natural when you have that conversation for the first time with a landlord. Okay, one more minute, and then we'll get a couple of people, hopefully, that'll share out. Okay, who's ready to share with me? I know I've already kind of forced one. I was like, can you do this for me? Will you do this for me? And it's Dash, right? Dash. Okay, I'm gonna bring you the microphone. You'll do it too? Perfect. Okay, here we go. It's so rare that I get just people who actually, volunteer.
Great. Hi, I'm Lisa. I'm from Catholic Social Services. Catholic Social Services is the largest provider of homeless services in Anchorage, and we've been doing a program called Rapid Rehousing for over 10 years. And Rapid Rehousing is about moving people into housing, people who are experiencing homelessness, and we would love to partner with you. Now, I just want to share with you, we've been doing this for 10 years with private landlords just like you. Here's a list of people who we've worked with, and you can call the top two. We've been working with them for so long, I bet you even know them already. When we work with a client, what we do is move them into a unit, and then we stay with them. Our case managers are mobile, and we're staying with them, so if there's a problem with the unit, if there's a problem with their rent, we're there to work with them, and we're there for you to be in touch with. So this is a way for you to fill vacant units and for people who are experiencing homelessness to move into housing, safe, good housing like yours. Would you be willing to partner with us?
You got money?
Yes, I do.
How much money?
We have $6,500 per household over 6 months. We work with them, we help them to stay employed or find other employment so that we're over time giving less money to them because they need less money. We help them with their initial deposit, we help them with rent, and we help them with other things. We help them with fixing their car, helping them to get a bus pass. This is about permanent stability.
She said. Exactly. So sometimes I really like to mess with people because we also have a role-playing game when we do this as a 2-day training where we have people get together and you have one case manager, one client, and one landlord. And I love to be the awful landlord and just really mess with people because people will ask you some crazy things on the phone. You did good. The only thing I would ever say is start with the money. Start with the money, because when we were talking yesterday, that's what I reminded you about. Like, they want to know there's money. And if they know there's money, they keep listening. If you don't mention the money, then they're just like, okay, when's this conversation over? Like, not going to do it. But as soon as you say subsidy of any kind, if you have one, that's a great place to start. You'll still do it for me, Dash? Yes, please. That's okay. Go ahead.
Elevator. Let me get my thoughts in. Okay, I'm sorry. Hey, my name is Dash. I am with the youth task force over at Covenant House, but we do have a rapid rehousing program that we just started implementing. So we do have funding to house a young person into their own apartment, and with that being said, we do have additional funding to help with utilities, as well as if the young person leaves and there's anything broken or misplaced or any kind of damages in the house, we definitely have funding and money to help with that as well. So we're just here. Housing First is our model, so we just want our young people out of the streets into a home, and then we're gonna have our case managers work with them throughout the process of finding a job, keeping a job, as well as getting all their basic needs met. And we do have other, we also have other partners that can help with furniture as well. So we're definitely we're just here looking for support from our community, and I believe you are a perfect person to ask, because you have some vacant spaces that we could possibly use for one of our young people. So would you like to partner with us?
That was really good, so thank you very much for doing it. A little bit more of a specific ask. Can I come by and see you? Do you have a chance that maybe I could come by and we could just have a conversation? Because seeing people, and I know that we all cover huge areas and maybe that's not possible, but if that's a possibility in your agency, that's the next step. So you start off with maybe that phone call, and then your next step is, can I come by and bring you some information about the program? One thing I will also say, be real careful when you mention Housing First, because most landlords, not all, but most landlords don't know what that is. And so then if they then ask you, well, what is Housing First? Then you have to start to get into an explanation of what Housing First looks like, and that cannot always be a positive thing. We see it as a positive, and it's been shown to be effective, but a landlord hears that you're going to take somebody who's possibly actively using or who has got active mental illness, and you're going to just put them in housing, and then you promise you're going to try to provide services. At that point, you're going to have a whole lot of money for that to be okay. So being a little bit careful about that, because in the social services world, we do want to hear about Housing First, but giving you the chance to build a relationship with them and then easing them into some of the theories of how all of that works is a great idea, in my experience. Has anybody else had a different experience than that with a landlord? You have? Okay.
I find breaking the ice and having the conversation and charming them over the phone and not really having a lot of ask, but asking, do you have units that are available? And then when I make that eye-to-eye contact, I can charm them, and then
Exactly.
I can win them over. I can win them over personally way more than I can on the telephone.
Exactly. So that's why a lot of times your ask needs to be, can I come by and bring you some more information about the program? I've had people say, well, there's only so much time being built into case management. We only have time for so many visits. I get that. But if you're doing housing-based case management, odds are you have taken a client somewhere. Maybe you've gone to a doctor's appointment. Maybe you've gone to take someone to a mental health center, and you can swing by after you drop that person off for an appointment. And if you work it right, I used to have to get a map before we had GPS and Google and all the things, and literally map out where I was going to go as a case manager to also try to figure out where I could go and continue to look for landlords or talk to new landlords. So thank you guys. Thank you for doing that. Does anybody else want to share one? Does anybody have any questions about the ones that were shared? Okay. In a minute, I might make you guys get up and do some jumping jacks since it's so late in the afternoon to make sure you stay with me. So today we're going to mostly talk about, I wanted to start with that activity because I promised it yesterday. I wanted to kind of roll into what we're talking about today, which is tenant readiness and eviction prevention. I love this because I really didn't even know that blue was a type of steak. I think that means you throw it on the grill, you flip it over really fast, and you basically eat raw meat. I'm not exactly sure. But it really spoke to me because we have clients who are in very different places when we start to put them in housing. And depending on our program, we can only stay with them for so long. It just kind of depends. Making sure that you are doing the most you can with the time you have to help someone build skills that will help them stay stably housed is very important. And also, it's just, the blue seems kind of weird to me, and it just made me laugh. So this is a chart that somebody, when I was doing one of these trainings, said, well, I have this form. How many of you have forms? That's a trick question, because if you don't have forms, you don't work in this field, is what I can figure out. Or you're a volunteer and somebody else is filling out your forms. But so, most of us have some sort of forms, but part of the thing when you are working with a client to get them ready to go into housing, remembering that we are talking in most cases about housing first, but we're talking about education. Just continuing to educate people, is that you don't talk to somebody from a place of a check the box kind of form. But these are some questions of things that you do need to be thinking about. One of the things I'll also say, in case you weren't with us yesterday, is that myself or Brian or someone is going to make sure that I get the sign-in sheet, and I make sure that everybody gets copies of the PowerPoints, some case studies that we have, a link to our learning management system so you can go and access some of these forms, and also some resources that'll then link you to Housing and Urban Development for what they have around landlord engagement toolkits and tenant readiness. So when I started this, I had some preconceived notions. I was 22 years old. I was 23, right out of college. I had lived a certain lifestyle. I had never been homeless. I had a father who had been unstably housed a few times, but didn't realize that that's what it was until I was older and actually doing housing. But I kind of thought that there are some basic things that everybody knew. And that was my own bias and preconceived notion as a person raised the way I was raised. We have to remember that that's not the case. That's not always the case. There are things that lots of times we don't think about, and this form covers that. They need to know specifically. So there's some things you're not going to sit down with somebody and read a lease. Have any of you rented an apartment or a house? Okay, got most everybody. Did any of you actually read your lease? Okay, some of you did. Did all of you understand it? Yes, really? Okay, well, that's a first, because I didn't, with the whereases and the herefores and the thereins and lots of things that come in leases. So when you sit down with someone and you start going over a lease, you're wanting to go over the lease, but you need to do it in terms that make sure that everyone understands exactly what that lease says, not just assume that somebody is going to be able to read it. So when you're talking about tenant readiness and you're looking at moving into an apartment, and you're thinking about what is a good tenant or whatever our units happen to be, how much rent do I pay each month? This is something that needs to be said over and over again, how much rent they're responsible for. When is it due each month? That's always been a really interesting thing for me because, people say it's due on the 1st, but you can have until the 5th. Well, what that translates to for me and a lot of my clients was it's due on the 5th, and if it's due by the 10th, then that, you should probably be okay. But making sure that they actually understand what that means. Who do I send, where do I send my rent payment? There have been times when I've been the landlord, the property manager, and the case manager. You really can't do that. And so that's not a good place to be. It's not a good power, power structure. But when you're a staff of 2, that happens to be your job, you want to make sure that you're very clear about you're not giving me your money. This is where you send the money. This is how you can send it. It can go in a money order. You can go into, it can't be cash. Sometimes with my clients, I would literally stamp the envelopes for them so that they could just mail in their rent and they knew exactly when it was due. If the rent is late, is there a late fee? How much is that? What does that look like? Who's responsible for that? For those of us who have programs with subsidies, a lot of times our clients might think that we're going to be able to pay that late fee, and that is not often the case. Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not. What pets are allowed? Funny story about that. Had somebody try to convince me that a python was an emotional support animal. Maybe for him it was an emotional support animal, but that was not anything that I could convince a landlord of. So making sure that you're very clear about what animals are allowed, if they're allowed, and who's responsible for the pet deposit. Are there rules about housekeeping and house cleaning? This one is key. We all have different ideas of what a clean house is. I have my own biases about what is a clean house. You need to make sure that people understand exactly what the lease says is a clean, a clean, safe environment, and not constantly be judging someone about how they might keep house. Like, what does the lease say is necessary? Can the landlord enter my apartment? You want to make sure that you're talking to your clients over and over again about what the rules are around that. Maybe they can't advocate for themselves, but if they feel like something has happened, they can call you so that you can advocate for them or, help them figure out what to say. And then very importantly, for some of the roles that I've been in, what are the rules about someone living with me? How many of you have been working with clients who tried to have someone move in with them without telling you? Or 4 people? Or a family? Yeah, it makes sense. It's basic human decency. If I luck up and manage to get into a program and now I have housing, how am I going to sit around with my housing and not be able to help somebody else have housing? How is that fair? Well, I understand the reasoning behind it, and you want to have that conversation with someone over and over again, because sometimes what that can mean is that then everyone is homeless again. There are rules around that, and these are things that I want to say, and I want to talk about this really clearly. This checklist needs to happen over and over and over and over and over again. Yes.
I just wanted to say, even like for young people, sometimes they don't understand.
Right.
They take this very literal.
Yes.
So we had a young person who then told us things were better now that she had a dog. And we said, oh, wait. Remember, your lease did not allow you to have a dog. No, it's not my dog. It's my friend's dog.
And my friend is traveling, and I said I would babysit it for her. And it's like, so, but it's in the apartment with you? Yes. So it's your dog, as far as the landlord is concerned. So sometimes what we learned just, on the fly too, is that everyone has a different interpretation, literal or, how broad. Just have really broad conversations about each of those topics.
Very much. That's definitely true. Another thing that comes into play on with the literal versus how people think about things or how people are raised is housekeeping. I've worked in this field for a long time, and I actually can tell you that I've worked with youth, and you know what? They weren't called youth. They were people who were 18 to 24 years old, and I was putting them in transitional housing with people who might be between 50 and 60 years old. Total difference. There were not a lot of figuring out. Nobody trained me. Nobody said, hey, now you're working with youth, there are some different issues here, or maybe there are different issues with a person who has significant mental illness. We have to learn that on the fly. So what you're talking about is learning things on the fly, and that's very true. Does anybody have any questions so much about this? Because the last one on there is a real positive for me. A lot of times we don't give our clients credit for being resourceful. They're very resourceful if given the opportunity. And if we see things as a negative, then we're missing a whole lot. We just have to learn how to help them spin that resourcefulness so that it helps them stay housed and successful. So, do all of you have a move-in packet? Those of you who are helping people move into properties or providing subsidies, you have a move-in packet. Okay. Here's a list. We can go through it. Lease, tenant rights and responsibilities, property rules, grievance policies and forms, emergency contact information, contact information for local resources, program agreements. That's a lot of reading. It's a lot of reading. And imagine if you're living in crisis and you're living homeless, or you're in a domestic violence situation, or you're in a family situation that's not stable, what are you really doing on the day you move into a house? I'll take any answer. What are you doing? If you're living in crisis and somebody says, hey, we found an apartment, and you get to move into an apartment, what are you doing that day?
Panicking.
Panicking?
Right.
Maybe,
When
yeah.
you're a youth, you're telling all your friends.
Telling people. These are good answers. Yep. What else?
Going to sleep.
Going to sleep? Maybe, when you get in.
Looking for stuff. Fill it.
Looking for stuff. Definitely trying to figure out if you can find a bed. What else? Okay, let me tell you what you're not doing. You're not listening when your case manager says, let's talk about your lease. Let's talk about your program agreement. Let's have a conversation where I go blah, 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 and you sit there and go, uh-huh, 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 uh-huh. Yes, I hear you. Everything. Hand me the key. There's excitement. There's fear. There's anxiety. There's elation. I mean, my anxiety brain, I call her Edith, because sometimes she can take over and just like spin things around in my head where I can't even think anymore because all I'm thinking about is the anxiety and the forecasting of what's happening next. People tend to be in places of crisis when they first move into housing in a lot of our programs. So this move-in packet is great. Everybody should have one. I learned an amazing tip that I will share with all of you that I learned from a fire marshal when one of my projects burned down. Yep. So, things happen. But he told me, he said, where everybody should keep important stuff? Do any of you know? In the freezer, because not everybody can afford a fireproof box, but if you've moved into somewhere, you usually have a refrigerator or a freezer. A freezer is the last thing to go up in flames in a house that burns even to the ground. So you can when you bring this move-in packet, you should bring it in a big old Ziploc bag. And that Ziploc bag can hold all of these things, and it can also hold all of their important documents, because I don't know about y'all, but I've had clients come to me, and their birth certificate was in a wad that kind of had to be spread out on a table so that I could even see what it was. And maybe they had their Social Security card, but it was in a trash bag because they didn't have suitcases. They had whatever they could find to get their stuff to the next place they were going. If you provide that Ziploc bag, it does not cost a lot of money to find a big Ziploc bag. You can even ask a church. We'll talk a little bit in a minute about how you can get donations on some things. But you're doing something for yourself too. Because if we go back to what I just said about tenant readiness, you move somebody in on that day and they're not hearing anything you've said. And so basically you hand them this Ziploc bag. Hopefully before that point, you've helped them fill out the application, or we've gone through that process. We've talked about the lease a little bit. We're working on all of that. But you hand them this Ziploc bag full of papers and you say, put this in the freezer. Put it in the freezer. Because they may not have a dresser. Have y'all ever moved anybody in who had zero furniture but maybe a mattress? Right. Well, you don't have anywhere to keep your Ziploc bag unless it's the freezer. So you tell them specifically, while I'm here, put this in the freezer. And then every time you have a follow-up appointment, you can walk in and say, go get your stuff out of the freezer. Let's talk about your lease a little bit. Let's have another conversation. We talked yesterday about adult learners and how it can take 7 or 8 times of hearing the same information before it actually finally starts to stick for us. There are some things that help with that, but it's hard to use humor while going over a lease, So when you have all of this in one place and you've given them a resource for we're not going to talk about all of this right now. I will be back to go over your case plan. Or maybe you've already talked about a housing case plan. Do all of you do a housing case plan as a part of your program? Does your client actually do the housing case plan with you, or is there just, okay, good. Because there are some people who are like, oh, well, we just know what the plan should be. I'm like, well, that's not very empowering. You don't get to decide what the housing case plan should be. You get to be the creative one that helps them figure out how to make goals and objectives that are meetable, but you don't get to decide that somebody can't buy a house if that's what they're eventually wanting to do, because I've had a client who bought a house. I didn't think it was possible either, but it happened. So you get this and you get it in your Ziploc bag and you tell them to put it in the freezer, and every time you go for a visit or every time they come to you, whatever your particular situation is, go get your bag out of the freezer and bring it with you. Make sure that you put it back in the freezer when you get back. But that gives them something that sticks every time, and you have those documents to go over every time, because now they have a copy of their case plan, their lease, their program agreement, the thing that says that the friend's dog can't stay there because now it's your dog. You know, you have something in front of you to kind of trigger that conversation and make sure that you're having an organic conversation that is still based in things that they need to know to stay housed. How many of you provide move-in supply kits? Yes. Okay, I'm serious, but y'all about to get up and start jumping up and down if I don't get some like hand raising so I can see you. There we go. All right, so what's in a move-in packet for you? Here, hold my microphone.
So for us, it's like the basics, like cleaning supplies. So the move-in, our actual like move-in like packet thing, it's not even like formed or created. It's actually created with that person that's moving in. So they go with their case manager to help that, like, you know, they're the ones picking out, like, you know, supplies for either cleaning supplies, toiletry stuff, anything from kitchen utensil, things like that, and or towels for basic needs. But we just have like a budget for them to go with their rapid rehousing manager, case manager, and then pick out those stuff. But it's all in the same process of the day of moving in. So even groceries is part of it as well. So.
So that's money that you have. That's money that you have to go to a store to do that, right? Okay. Hold on, one guys. I'm sorry. I'm still a little bit fighting the. Well, I'm not fighting the flu, as in I'm not contagious, but I still have a little bit of the cough that's left over. So what I have found, what's been really interesting, I love the resourcefulness part. We're also very resourceful as rural community case managers. There may be communities of faith or civic organizations that you could, or school, there are school programs in high schools and in colleges where people are needing to do some sort of community investment, community service learning. There's service learning in high schools and in fraternities, sororities, churches, things like that. If you even have a basic closet, you can oftentimes get a lot of those things donated for you. You specifically send them a list. You reach out to your communities of faith or to whoever it is that you think that can provide that stuff, and then you go ahead and you ask them specifically, Dawn dishwashing liquid, or some sort of dishwashing liquid, some sort of detergent. So, ask very specifically so you don't get some random SOS pads and like a toothbrush. But making sure that you kind of ask specifically for those things. A lot of people don't think about it, but first aid supplies are great for adding to that. And sometimes you can go to your hospitals and ask them if they would be willing to donate some of this. What I talked about yesterday in finding landlords is the same in tenant readiness. It's all about the ask. You don't know, you're not going to get turned down if you don't actually go out and ask for it. So if you can get some of that donated, that means that you have that, in your particular situation, Dash, you have money left over that could buy more groceries, or that could buy feminine products. There are things that are not covered by food stamps that people still need to have. And some of that is like feminine hygiene products. Some of that is depending on what state you're in, but these are the things that I've heard. It can be first aid supplies. One thing that I never thought about, I learned pretty quickly to think about when you are helping someone move in is a plunger. Sounds crazy. But especially if you own a property, you're really happy if somebody has a plunger. So making sure that, like, if you're asking for people to donate things, a pillow is really important. You may not think about it, but people may not have a pillow. So if you can get that, and you don't have to have, we're not talking about having a giant storage unit. If you can't afford that, that's not what we're going for here. But going for the size of request, the size of ask that you are capable of providing storage for, gives you something that is the same for every client. Because here's what I'm going to tell you, especially when you have units where lots of people are living together around the same complex, people know what other people got from your agency, and then have concerns about why they didn't get it. Why did so-and-so get more than me? How did this happen? And then we start with some negativity that's being sown early instead of more positivity, because remember we talked about people going in kind of this crisis mode. They want to make sure a lot of times that there's that things are equitable. So if you can provide the same basic supply kit to most of your clients, then there are add-ons on top of that. And you can have a response to people when they say, well, why did she get groceries and I didn't get groceries? Well, she hasn't, maybe people are not always, not giving away her business, but maybe people are not always approved for food stamps. Everybody's situation is different. But at least you start with kind of that basic kit that you give people to get started. Also, you want to think about things like, do they know how to work the heat and air conditioning? Lots of, I'm staying in a hotel right now. I about froze to death the first night because it said turn down the thermostat to the right temperature. Well, I did that, but then there's this other button around the corner where you're supposed to turn on a fan. I didn't know I was supposed to turn on the fan, so I'm laying there like, I set it on 80. I don't understand what's happening in here, until I found the little button right around the corner. I was like, oh, well, that made it warm in here real quick. I wish I'd seen that the first night at 1 a.m. when I arrived. But my point is, lots of times we don't know how the electronics work in our house. We don't know that you can't go back and forth between heating and air conditioning in the same day without burning up your unit. I've had plenty of clients. I'm Alabama, again. At night, it could be 50 degrees, and during the day, it could literally be 102. And people would go back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, until my maintenance man finally called, and he was like, your heat pumps are about to blow up. There's got to be a conversation. And I had never thought to have that conversation. So when you're doing that move-in, those are some of the things for you to think about that you want to talk to people about. Another example that somebody gave me, you might want to make a part of a move-in kit that's reasonably cheap, is storage containers. Lots of times people don't think about, maybe they have a set of pots and pans, so you were able, through a thrift store or through a donation, to provide pots and pans, or they got them or whatever, but they don't have anything to put leftovers in, so they just take that hot pot and stick it in the refrigerator. Well, that can shatter a glass shelf in a refrigerator really quickly, or it can leave burns on countertops. There are things that we think maybe people know that they actually don't really know. And so thinking ahead on what some of those things are and having that conversation, if not when they move in, within a couple of days of them moving in. Hey, and you can do it. We always need to do it in a very respectful way, saying, this is information that I provide for all of my clients who are moving into units. Do you know how to work the air conditioner? Let's talk about that. Do you know how to the refrigerator? Do you know about this? Do we need to go over any of these cleaning supplies and how you use them? Let's go back and look at the lease and talk about cleanliness, or what a clean unit needs to look like. So, we talked yesterday too about it's all about relationship. Well, supporting tenant readiness is also about relationship. Being respectful but also extremely informative is very helpful for all of us. All of us, but especially someone who's been living in crisis and is going into a unit for the first time. Can anybody think of something that they would add to the list of what you could provide as move-in supplies? Dishes, silverware. Do you have, do any of you reach out to communities of faith, thrift stores? Any of you ever thought about reaching out to hotels? Good. I like the resourcefulness here. Any universities near here that provide dorm living? So an interesting thing about state-run universities is that if you are a nonprofit, and anytime they have things that are left over that go into their surplus building, most state-run universities will have surplus, or if they receive state or federal dollars. You as a nonprofit, if you take your letter that says you're a nonprofit, you can go in, and if they have surplus materials that you can use, they can donate those to you. Obviously, don't tell it to a university that you're going to take 50 twin beds if you don't have a place for 50 twin beds to stay. I've seen that happen to people too. But you can go in, because here's what I did. I made a relationship. I'm going to make his name up, but Bob. I made a relationship. I knew somebody else who worked at the university that was a friend of mine, and she was like, hey, we've got surplus. I know, because I'm the one who just redesigned the dorms, that a whole bunch of stuff just went into surplus. You might want to go down and see him. I made it a point to become friends with Bob, so that every time he got inundated with whatever was coming in, he started to pull aside the good stuff for me that he knew I could use. He started making sure they didn't keep things always like mattresses, because we have to think about things like bed bugs and lots of other things like that. But there are materials and furniture that they use that maybe it's not the couch that we want for the rest of our life, but it's something to sit on for a while. Maybe it's a chest of drawers or a bedside table so that someone has a place to keep their things. So state-run universities, hospitals, communities of faith, thrift stores sometimes even have things that they can't sell, they've had for a long time. And if you have a relationship with them, they'll be like, well, we'll put this aside for you if you'll come get it on Tuesday. Like, just building those relationships gives you the opportunity, because oftentimes our clients have not learned the skills yet to build those relationships. And it doesn't take much for us to build that relationship so that we get some free furniture out of it. And we're able to help somebody not be sleeping on a mattress on the floor. Any other ideas for where you might can get things? Good to know.
Access, I don't remember what they call it right now.
So, when you say military, so like an army base or
Surplus.
they have surplus? Okay, that's great. Have y'all ever gotten stuff from the army surplus? Oh, that's really cool.
We got metal bunks
Uh-huh.
and some couches.
That's great. Also this is really sad, but looking around small communities, you see businesses going out of business, and they will have a going out of business sale, and then another going out of business sale, and then another one, and then there's still stuff left. You can go in as a nonprofit and be like, hey, if you give me a set of those shelves you've been using, I can give you a tax letter. You can at least get a write-off. Seems like you've probably had a bad year, your business just closed, but maybe a tax letter would help, And you can get something like a set of shelves or something that they've been using as display in their store. It's just kind of managing and reminding yourself to keep your eyes open when you're going through these communities. There's always the possibility of something. It's all about the ask. Even in tenant readiness, it's all about the ask. Yes, ma'am.
One thing to watch out for too in your community, if you see a hotel or motel that's either changed hands or is renovating, it's a great place to get tables, TVs, dressers. It doesn't necessarily have to be a bed, but there's a whole lot of other things.
Exactly.
Hanging lamps and sometimes fans, all kinds of stuff. You'd be surprised at how much when they do a renovation, they gut it.
She's right.
There's about
That got really loud on me all of a sudden. Yes, you're right. So you can get lamps, you can get all kinds of things. I strongly suggest you don't get cloth furniture like couches from anywhere. If it's covered in some sort of cleanable material, that's different. I live in a college town, which is extremely interesting. When a semester ends, especially fall semester, we have kids who have just basically not been able to make it. Like, peace out, Auburn. I can't do this. I'm done. And they just leave. And then property management companies are putting stuff to the road, and we have a whole culture of I've been a case manager forever, but lots of people like, okay, school just shut down, fall semester's over, let's start riding around, because there will literally be pots and pans sitting on the side of the road, silverware, plates, dishes, like all kinds of stuff that the property management company literally just hauled to the road, left it there. You always still want to be careful. No fabric. No couches. I don't care if it looks like the prettiest thing you've ever seen. Don't do it. But lots of other things, lamps. So just starting to think thrifty, like in a thrifty way, helps you find a lot of things for people. Any other ideas? The Army surplus is the first time anybody's ever brought that up to me, and I was really close to an Army base. So thank you for that. Anybody else?
The problem is trying to store it all until you can use it.
Exactly. So that's what I was talking about earlier. The problem is trying to store it. So that's where the thriftiness, the resourcefulness also comes in that maybe you have a relationship that you've had with a church and they have a little bit of extra space where they could keep a few things for you if you know you're going to be using those things. Again, we're not looking to get 50 bunk beds if you don't think you don't even have vouchers for 50 people. You know what I mean? Like, I have seen agencies, and I've worked for an agency that was like, we got it, and then put it all in a storage unit, and then guess how much a storage unit costs every month? And then we couldn't use it all, and then, of course, that executive director left, and then nobody even knew the code to the storage unit and where it even was and what was happening. And so those things can go wrong on you. Don't just be keeping large piles of things, because you never know that you're going to be able to use them, and then it just becomes, an issue of finance for your particular agency. Anything else? Anybody got anything else they want to add to this, or any other resources that we can use? I love peer-to-peer learning. I would really love for you all to talk to one another and teach each other, because, for instance, I have not ever thought of a military base as a place where I could get surplus. So, we were talking a little bit yesterday about having your landlord lists. When you have your landlord list, sometimes we tend to hold on to it like this, like, it's my list. You can't have my list. These are my landlords. I've worked hard for them. I'm keeping my list. But oftentimes you'll find that if you share that, you actually can reap the benefits of it. Other people will share their lists with you, and maybe you burn down a landlord, but somebody else can use them, and vice versa. It's kind of the same with supplies. If you figure out ways to get these supplies, keep some of them close to your vest, especially if you're using them really often. But share that with other people, because maybe there's going to come a time when a community of faith or a church or a college or a school or whatever will do a move-in kit drive for you, and all of a sudden you're going to have 150 move-in kits. It'd be great is just to reach out to another nonprofit who's doing housing work and being like, hey, I got 50 move-in kits that you can have. There's only possible that I'm going to use 100 this year, or I have space for 50 or whatever. So sharing that information with each other is always key. It just makes us better case managers.
Emergency preparedness kits are really good to give to people also, because then there's, you have a flashlight or, just emergency preparedness, which is something that most of us don't have in our homes, but it's a good kit to hand out to people as well. And also, some of you may not know, Safeway has a policy that for nonprofits, you can go in once a month and get $30 of free stuff, and they will support you in that, and that is Safeway. Yes way.
When all of you leave today, don't beat your doors down to get to a Safeway and have the poor Safeway staff being like, the manager's not here. We don't know what's happening. You're going to have to come back later. But that's a great resource to have. Yeah. Yes.
I was just going to follow up on that emergency preparedness because it's a great idea, and we have a program with moving folks experiencing homelessness into housing, and we also are the refugee resettlement agency for the state of Alaska. So we house refugee clients from around the world. The world's homeless. And when we had our big earthquake here in the Anchorage and the Valley area, or in Eagle River, that was a big learning for us. That although we talk about earthquakes, we hadn't given everyone that basic flashlight. This is who you can call. This is who has questions, and so now, but we can use FEMA money to buy all that.
So thank you for sharing that. So I worked for an HIV agency, HIV care provision agency, for about 13 years in Alabama. Y'all can imagine what a fun job that could be sometimes, going out and doing education or outreach around HIV in rural communities. But we oftentimes think about writing grants for things that matter, like money for services, money for housing vouchers. There are other options out there that really all you need is the Google. Just go to your Google box, look up grant opportunities, emergency preparedness, and there's a possibility that you can get 50 backpacks, because we did. We managed to get, I think at that particular time, we had about 50 or 60 active clients. I wrote the grant. We were able to get 50 backpacks. And so it wasn't just a kit like a toolbox, but it was a backpack that had gloves, first aid supplies, a flashlight, extra batteries. It had all of these things well packed into this backpack that we could then give to our clients, and I was able to give it to at least 50 clients. So sometimes just reaching out, thinking about it, and when I say write a grant, I'm not talking about some of the grants that we're used to writing that are 50 pages, single-spaced, and Times New Roman. I'm talking 3 pages. 3 pages where you fill it out online. Have any of you ever written for, and I know every state is different, but Walmarts and Home Depots, you can write, okay. So a lot of times you can write to, and there's national Walmart, and then there's local Walmarts. You can write those a little differently. And I've been able to write for literally just like $25 gift cards or $50 gift cards, or, whatever I can write in. Any chance you have, as long as you, make sure it goes by your executive director or your CEO. But when you can write for those things, that can help you get in that information, because I've done the gift cards a lot of times. I learned pretty quickly that I don't want to have bias around groceries that I provide for people. So instead, I'll be like, hey, I'll take you to the grocery store. Here's a $50 gift card. You get to choose what you want with that. I've had some hard lessons about making sure that I found gift cards for people for food or for whatever, and had them go in and buy cigarettes, and have them go in and buy alcohol. I gave that person that gift card. I gave them the gift card. It's not my choice. It's not my decision on how they spend it. If I have a policy that I give clients a $50 gift card or whatever, then I just have to do that. and walk away from it and not make judgments about it. So there are times when that happens to us, but we don't want to be punitive about it because that might still be something that they need for move-in readiness. And it's not my place to make a decision about it. So how can you help support tenant readiness? I think all of the tips and the tricks and the things that we've just talked about are great, but the number one thing is that communication. It doesn't take 5 minutes sometimes. I know we have some clients who might take an hour or 2 hours or 3 hours of our day, and other clients who really don't even want to talk to us. They're like, I'm paying my rent, I got my portion, I got a job, I'm good, peace out. Fine, you've made your contact with that person, you've done whatever. But making sure that you have active communication is how you stop eviction. Being able to have a non-biased relationship with your clients, not calling and grilling them, how's this going, how's this going, how's this going, but actually having a conversation where you fit those questions in a way that feels much more like you're caring and not marking things off of a box is going to allow clients to open up to you if we have someone who's decompensating. And you can catch it before we get to a place of eviction. And then maybe you're serving that client again and now they have an eviction on their record. So just being able to control your own stuff, remembering that being a case manager and having conversations with people is the number one way that you support tenant readiness. Having that, I call it, the FAQ. Do have a list of frequently asked questions. I didn't think about it until probably 10 or 15 years into doing case management, making sure that they know when the food banks are giving out food. We have some food banks in some of our rural areas where there are churches that do food banks. I sat down one day and looked at the schedule and I was like, okay, you can only be helped 3 times in a year by each of these agencies. So here's how we're going to do it. All right, so you're going to go like in December to this one. And then if we can get you through to you get your food stamps, then we're going to go like in February to this one. And then we're going to rotate through. And I figured out how to do that. People need that assistance, and it helps them know that you care. You're not gaming the system. You're helping someone get fed. And everybody is having the same opportunity. So figuring out the resourcefulness, and that was actually taught to me by a client. He actually said, did you know if I go to this one on this month and this one on this month and this one on this month, I can feed the 3 kids and still manage to do it on food stamps? And I was like, that's genius. What was that schedule again? I need to write it down. He was like, don't share it with too many people. This is how I'm surviving. But making sure that you have that information, those resource lists for that area. Also, there's something that we don't think about in tenant readiness. Sometimes we're thinking about all of the emergencies. We're thinking about food, and we're thinking about clothes, and we're thinking about furniture. What are we not thinking about? Can anybody think of one thing that helps people stay stably housed that we haven't even mentioned? Transportation is a good one, right? Employment is a good one. Utility assistance is another one.
Social interaction.
Got it. Social interaction is huge. It's huge. You can provide or help someone find everything they need, and their apartment looks beautiful, and they are so excited to be in it, and they got a house plant, and maybe a cat's allowed, and everything's great, and they are lonely as heck, and they're not going to stay because they're depressed and they're lonely, and they don't feel seen. It's really important when you're providing that move-in kit that you also provide some information. You're not making decisions about what somebody's faith is, but let them know what communities of faith are in that area. Let them know what civic organizations are in that area. Let them know about the library that's in that area. These are places you can go. I had multiple churches, in rural areas, multiple churches that had church vans or had people who were retired who were willing to go out and drive around and pick people up and take them to church. And I had people go from being very unhappy and depressed to like, hey, guess what? I went to the church dinner last night. And I was like, but you went to the Church of Christ dinner at the white one? And he was like, Yeah, like their whole thing is changing. It's not quite so white anymore. Like there's lots of different people in there. Things are changing. And in the South, that is an issue. I mean, we have communities of faith that are predominantly white or predominantly black or whatever the situation is. But they all started working together, and we had a different situation going on in this particular rural community. In that particular program, I did not pick where we would put it. Nobody asked me when they built it. But we built a transitional house for 3 adult men, and then another one right next to it that was for 2 single women with children. Shared living in rural Alabama, 12 miles from a gas station. Can't tell y'all how hard I worked on that particular program. It was tough. It was tough when it was transitional and we were helping people move into other particular house. That was different, but then when it got changed to permanent supportive housing, guess what? There's not a lot of adults who want to share space 12 miles from a gas station when they have no transportation. So really thinking about when you're starting to look at development, when you're starting to think about people coming to you, partnering like, hey, let's build some housing. Let's do this. Free housing is not always free housing. You know what I mean? Free property is not always free property. So you need to take those things into consideration when you're thinking about tenant readiness and eviction prevention. Did you have something? Okay. Does anybody have any questions around that? Anything so far? Okay. So here's another little activity for us. Christy, I did not ask you this earlier, but can you take some notes for me? So I want us to just kind of start throwing out a few things. Just throw out some words. First question. We're going to stick with the first question when Christy finds a notepad. Just a second. I didn't warn her. It's not real fair. I actually forgot the slide the activity was in here, so that's on me. Sorry, Christy. Okay, so first question, just start throwing it out. We've been talking about tenant readiness. We've talked about landlord engagement yesterday. What are your responsibilities to your client? Just start throwing out some words. Support. Throw them out loud, people. They're recording me. Sorry? Mentorship. Mentorship. Honesty. Transparency. Follow through.
Availability.
Respect.
Availability.
Availability. Within reason. Inside your, yes. No, I've had some people who are like, no, I just let them call me at midnight. What? You do what? What else? To your clients. Did somebody say resources? Did we get resources? Anybody else got anything? I got one. Boundaries. Boundaries set a tone for relationships and keep you from burning out after 2 years. What else? Confidentiality, definitely. Any others? Okay. What are your responsibilities as a case manager or a housing program coordinator to your landlords? Start throwing some stuff out. Transparency. Trust. Honesty. Timely payments, or, payments as quick as you can get them to them, but, the payments that you promised.
Having good open communication.
Communication.
Health education.
Education, so landlord education. We talked about that a lot yesterday, thank you. Making sure that you're providing for your landlords just like you're providing for your clients. It's win-win. What else?
Problem solving.
Problem solving. How about assistance with problem solving? Yeah. Relationship. Mm-hmm. Information, program information. Hey, Christy.
Follow through
Follow through,
for them too.
right? Boundaries. Boundaries. There's a couple that were left off of a couple of these that I'll bring up in just a minute. Has anybody else got one? What is your responsibility to the landlord?
I'm gonna say support, just like to my consumers.
Yep.
Because as far as I'm concerned, they then become part of my network, and I
Yep.
also need to support them as much as I do my consumers.
Within reason, yes, you are. That's very, very true, yes. So one that we left off on clients is advocacy. It's our job to constantly be advocating for our clients. It's also a responsibility to advocate for our landlords in some ways. First two questions. Can anybody think of any more responsibilities to your client? Documentation. For both of them, landlords and clients. Okay. What are your responsibilities to your organization or your program? Paperwork. Documentation. Yeah, paperwork. No, it's true. You can't keep the money if you don't keep up with what you did with the money. Fidelity. Integrity. Trust. I mean, because usually if you think about it, our agencies are putting a lot of trust in us, putting us in a car and say, going forth, do your work. So being trustworthy. What else? Communication. Boundaries. Boundaries. Compliance. Yes. Compliance with the rules and the regulations and the policies and the procedures. There may be a lot of them, but most of them are there for a reason because it wasn't there and something happened and then it had to get written. Like, see, it's happened to a lot of us. Like, ooh, that should have been a policy. What else? Confidentiality. What was it? Until we die. Yeah. Till death wrings it from my face, I will keep your secrets. What else? Consultation, tell me more. Yeah. Yeah, so I guess we would call that like case conferencing or staffing if we run into an issue. Yeah. What else? Data. Data is huge. Data is how you get the money. Keep up with the data. What else? Resourcefulness. There's a big, big, big one I'm waiting for somebody to say. I keep feeling like if I just stand here and wait, somebody's going to say it. Grants, following the guidelines of the grant. So yeah, that kind of goes back to, compliance.
With everything.
Self-care, yeah. That's a great one, thank you. What else? Yeah, so being open to professional development. It is amazing how many times I've met a case manager who's been a case manager for 30 years and think they know everything. And you're like, there's been a whole lot of policy changes since you first started this. Like housing first, like there's some things we could be learning. So professional development, what else? Y'all, there's a big one. We mentioned compliance, yep. Okay, I'm going to give it to you, and you're all going to feel dumb. What? Go ahead.
To advocate for your clients and landlords on behalf of helping to make the program better.
So advocacy. I think we're all here for advocacy training or advocacy day. Like advocacy is something you're doing for your agencies, which then trickles down to your clients and then trickles also down to your landlords. So advocacy should be one in all three. Food. Remember we talked yesterday about food? Show up with food occasionally. People will love you even if you have a really bad day and you act ugly. And so I will say this because I got verbally slapped at one of these trainings one time. This one was like, you really don't know what it's like to work in a rural community. I don't make a lot of money. I can't be spending my own money on donuts. Yes, I actually do know that. I did do it for a long time, and I'm not asking you to spend your own money. But you know what you can do? You can also go to Kroger or whatever your local grocery store is, and they have to mark down food. And sometimes if you build a relationship with Bob, who marks down the food and really hates to throw away the food, you can get the food for a really reduced price. And sometimes if you've also built a relationship with a community of faith or some other civic organization, they're willing to give you a little bit of money that helps pay for food. And then food can go to help with landlord engagement, and food can go to help with clients, and food can just make sure your boss gets her donuts every once in a while. Everybody's happier with food. What else?
Is it marketing your program to make sure they know about it?
Marketing. Yes, marketing. I'm wringing it out of you. Just standing here waiting. Yes, did you have one? No. What was it?
Ensuring the sustainability of my programs.
Yes. And how would you do that? Keep going with that.
By being a great advocate and being the best I can be at what I do.
Right, so that's the touchy-feely one. What's the other one? Fiscal responsibility. Fiscal responsibility. We owe our agencies fiscal responsibility. We need to spend that money the best way we can. That's not just what we owe our agency, it's what we owe our clients. Fiscal responsibility. Thank you. One more. Go more. What was you saying? Somebody say something? Teamwork. Teamwork. Yes, being open to working as a team. Okay, I'm going to give you the last one because we've been doing this for a little while. You're the face of your agency. In a small town especially, you're the face of your agency. It doesn't matter if you're in work, if you're out of work. I happen to be married to a teacher. There's some real interesting rules about being a teacher and your behavior when you're not teaching and all these kinds of things. And that's why we chose to live 35 minutes from the school so that we can live life, after work. But you are the face of your agency. So being an ethical face of your agency who's following, hopefully, the guidelines that your agency has set forth about their mission and their vision and how you represent yourself in the community is key. Because I can tell you from experience when that doesn't happen and somebody gets fired or somebody quits and somebody's let go and another person moves into that position and that agency has gotten a bad reputation, it's really hard to help people. So becoming a better face for your agency is huge.
And people never forget.
No, they don't.
25 years ago, somebody was going to a village and they decided to drink on the ferry and didn't get off the ferry, and we'd spent a week preparing that community for that person to come and be an advocate. And because they decided to drink and not get off the ferry, Now that community does not want anyone back in there because they are soured, and people do not forget.
People, and she's right. People don't forget, and especially in rural communities. But what I can also tell you is that when you're being a good face for your agency and you are being a lot of the things that we've just talked about, which is trustworthy, kind, you're following the guidelines, you're following the rules, there is room for you to look at someone and say, I am not Francis. I hear that it went bad. I hear it went wrong. But now I'm me, and this is what I want to do. And can you give me just 5 more minutes to come by and talk to you again about the program? So they don't forget, but there is still the possibility that if you are being a good face for your agency, that you can sometimes change minds in communities. So there's one that we haven't talked about, and this is one that is actually a responsibility to your client, to your landlord, and to your organization. And then I want to see your list real quick. Can I see the list when you're done? Thank you. Does anybody know what it is? Transition planning. Transition planning. We talked about documentation, how important it is to make sure that all the notes and all the things go into the case plans, and go into the files so that, everything is there. And that's part of transition planning. We don't all stay in the job. Maybe some of us have, maybe some of us don't. But making sure that if you leave a job and you have the opportunity, you provide a transition plan that tells people, these are the landlords, these are some tips about this particular landlord. He does not want to be bothered. He does want it. He likes it. Giving people information for whoever's coming into a position after you continues to provide good things for both your client, or all of them, your client, your landlord, and your organization. People continue to feel cared for. So, can anybody tell me why we just did this slightly long but informative little exercise?
Well, there's a lot of similarities.
Yes.
A lot of the things that we said, thinking of each of those groups of people, or, perspective, it was very similar.
Yeah, so that's the whole point of it. That's the whole point of it, is that sometimes we think about our job in some silos. These are the responsibilities I have for this. This is what I owe you. This is what I owe you. Some of those things can be very different, but there's some that go all the way across all of it. And that's transparency, confidentiality, trust, integrity, respect, fiscal responsibility. Those things are responsible across all the parts of what we do as a case manager. And so sometimes if you break it down and you just look at it from its most simple forms, you see that. You're doing the same work for 3 different groups. It's the same thing. It kind of makes it a little less hard to think about all the different things that we have to do as case managers. Thank you, Christy. Does anybody have any questions or comments that they want to offer about that particular exercise? I was told I could go over just a little bit because we started a little bit late, so I hope you guys will hang out with me for a few more minutes. Okay? So, we talked about honesty and integrity. We talked about our key takeaways. We're going to talk about eviction prevention. And it's really not that long because it's fairly easy depending on what you know about your community. Here's the definition for eviction. To expel, remove, or dislodge a person, especially a tenant, from land or a building by legal process. That last part needs to be underlined. Legal process. How many of you have ever had a landlord tell your client that they're being evicted and did it with a sticky note stuck on the door that says you got to be out in 5 days? Anybody ever have that happen? Yeah, me too. That's not eviction. That's one of those things we talked about yesterday where it's like, that's illegal. You can't do that. But you have to figure out different ways to talk to people and not, offend them. But this is eviction. Here's some reasons for eviction. What else can you guys think of? We got unpaid or late rent. Who wants to read some of those for me?
Criminal activity, unauthorized guests, neighbor disturbance, poor housekeeping, other breach in the lease.
Other breach in lease. Other breach in lease leaves a lot of room. That's the place where I'm not asking any of you to be lawyers. We are not lawyers, but we do know how to read leases to some extent. Knowing and making sure that you've gone over that lease over and over and over and over and over and over and over with your client means that you know what the breaches in the lease are. A breach in the lease could be having that dog or the snake. That's a breach in the lease. We hear things like neighborhood disturbance. Neighborhood disturbance can mean a whole lot of things. You need to be able to define that to your client. What does neighborhood disturbance mean? Neighborhood disturbance, I don't care if it's legal or not, means you probably shouldn't go stand outside another tenant's apartment door and smoke weed and blow it in through their window. Like, there are things that are neighborhood disturbance. You have to be careful about these things, and making sure your clients understand what they are keeps us out of the eviction process. And sometimes we have to be very, very clear. You know, I had a client said, well, why can't I listen to my own stereo? I'm in my apartment, I'm listening to my stereo, I don't understand why it's a really big deal. Well, you know, everybody doesn't want to listen to death metal. So maybe if we get you some headphones, you can still listen to your stereo, but you're not stressing everyone else out around you that may not want to listen to the same kind of music. So giving examples, real world things when you're talking to people helps keep us out of eviction. Criminal activity, that one can be a little iffy. Is it criminal activity on the property? What does the lease say? Does the lease say conviction? Or does it just say the police came and got you and you went away? It depends on what the state laws are for your particular area. I don't want to make any assumptions, because I've learned in several frontier states how different it can be for what criminal activity can mean based on a lease that is still a legal binding document. But making sure you explain to people what criminal activity means. We've talked about unauthorized guests. It's not, sometimes you'll say, well, people will say, well, I don't understand why my family can't come to stay. Well, they can, but what does the lease say about how long they can stay? Because once they're there 15 days, that's probably living there. You know what I mean? It's not often an extended vacation. So making sure when you're talking to your clients that you define exactly what these things mean. Also, poor housekeeping. This is when I talked earlier about having some of my own biases about what people know and what they don't know about how to keep a property clean. You need to know and be able to communicate exactly what the lease says about housekeeping. Usually means safe, decent, and sanitary. It means allowing pest control to come in. Sometimes there's issues around hoarding, but it means making sure that your unit is not a fire hazard, and explaining specifically what that means so that you can help people avoid eviction. Sometimes we just don't. Have any of you, am I the only one in the room that's going to admit that I've had a bias about something, or I just didn't think to tell somebody something because it just seemed like common sense? Have any of you, can you just admit that? Because I get up in most of my trainings and admit my failures, because we all learn from when we screw up. Very often when we're flying high, we don't learn anything. So that's really important, is making sure that you don't let your own stuff get in the way, and that you teach people exactly what their leases mean and how to follow those leases. Here's case manager responsibilities when it comes to eviction. Who wants to read them for me? Thank you. I was like, I'm just going to stand here and stare at y'all.
Helping client understand rights and responsibilities in relation to eviction. Provide clients with possible housing options to keep clients from re-entering homelessness. Advocating for tenants with landlords for fair treatment during the eviction process.
So those are pretty basic statements that cover a whole lot of stuff, though, and can look very different depending on what your particular situation is. One of the most important on there for me, though, is advocating for tenants with landlords for fair treatment. Again, I'm going to say it probably the 10th time in 2 days. You don't know if you don't ask. One of the things that Dash brought up for us yesterday was mutual termination of a lease. I think that's what you called it, right? That's a real thing and can happen. Most people don't want to go to eviction court, so if you can be that person in the relationship that says, hey, come on, give me 10 days. Give me 10 days, I've got some resources. Let me see what I can do to help make sure that this person is not being dislocated back into homelessness, because we don't want people to be homeless. I know you don't want them to be homeless. You want your money. You want your unit to look good. Give me 10 days so that maybe you'll lease to me again, and I can or lease to one of my clients again.
Eviction off of your consumer's record.
Oh yeah, she's right. That's what we want to do. We never want to have an eviction. That's why we want that mutual termination. And I have literally sat down and said, like, hey, look, I think we both know this is not working. Had my client with me and been like, Fred, don't you think this is not working? I mean, you're not happy with pest control, and you're not happy with the fact that he won't let anybody in, and he's sleeping in the parking lot sometimes. Like, why don't we just call it even? Give me 10 days, and let's see if I can get him somewhere else that'll help him be more stably housed. You'd be surprised how many people will go for it. And remember that if you do have to go to eviction court, you should be looking for landlords because we learned that yesterday. Here's your tenant's rights when it comes to eviction. Right to live in decent, safe, and sanitary housing that is free from environmental hazards. Rights to have repairs completed in a timely manner. Make sure you know what's in the lease. They should have a statement in their lease that always says what a timely manner is, and you need to be ready to advocate for that. Right to reasonable notice in writing of any non-emergency inspection or entry into the unit. How many of us have clients who have been victims of trauma? Everybody just raise your hand. Come on. All of our clients have been victims of some sort of trauma, right? Most of us don't like random people walking into our houses unannounced, and you'd be surprised how many landlords think that it's their right to be able to do that. So making sure that you can advocate for people and making sure that landlords understand that that is a right of everyone. Reasonable accommodation for persons with disabilities. If we had a longer time, I would want us to have a conversation about this because this is a really big and interesting part of eviction and part of who's responsible for what. You know, there's reasonable accommodation, and then there's my client just wants to have an emotional support animal. What is the rule in Alaska about emotional support animals versus service animals? Is there a rule? Does anybody know it? So if you are moving into an apartment and they say no pets allowed, and you have a certificate that says you have an emotional support animal, that counts.
Yes,
Good.
even if it's a donkey.
But you don't know, or you're disagreeing? I'm just curious.
Well, I know we can't in the youth shelter, but we can have, they can come in for service on
So is that's a program rule, or is that's a, okay?
It's a licensing thing.
That's what I'm talking about. Go ahead.
I think it has to do with the private landlord. It should go across the board, but as I understand and read, it's
Great. So at the end of this PowerPoint, there's going to be some resources, but this is something I want you guys to look up because every state is very different. California says across the board, every animal that if you have a certificate for an animal, whether it's emotional support or service animal, that's allowed. Those count as the same thing. Many other states say no. Service animal is allowed. Emotional support animal is not. That's a pet. That's not the same thing. I don't care what the certificate says. So it kind of depends on what your state regulations are. So if we've had a couple of different answers in the question, in this room, that might be something you guys want to look up later. Because again, I'll make the statement, I am not a fair housing lawyer. I know a few. If you have these questions, you can look up who is providing some fair housing resources in your state and make some phone calls and ask those questions because they should know the answers. Okay. Reasons for eviction. We have leases not renewed. Everybody knows that is different than eviction, right? Do you guys have just non-renewal of leases? You should. If a lease is 12 months, a landlord in most states, I think all states, I'm not going to speak specifically to it, but a landlord can decide to not renew a lease at the end of a lease, even though they're not choosing to evict you. And depending on the state, they may or may not have to give a reason. They just decide to not renew the lease. We don't want that to happen just as much as we don't want an eviction to happen. And I mean, eviction is going to look worse on your record, but we're all working towards not having a not renewal of lease happen too. And then eviction may occur when a tenant remains on the premises after the lease has expired or been terminated. How many of you have ever started working with a client and maybe you're providing some rapid rehousing to help them stay housed, and that you realize that their lease has not been renewed and they've been living under that lease for an extra 3 months and there's no signature? Has that ever happened to anybody? That's a great place for advocacy. That's a possibility for, hey, you know what? Maybe you didn't get rent the last 3 months, but technically you didn't have a lease either. Let's have a conversation about that. Maybe we can help out. So making sure you know that information from your clients if they do have a lease, what's going on with that lease is really important to know. Yes?
In Alaska, it automatically goes to monthly.
So it rolls over? Right. So it's been very interesting to me. There are some states that are extremely landlord-oriented and others that are more tenant-oriented. And so, like, I think Alabama goes to month too, but I'm not going to call out any other states. There are others that don't. It's just 12 months, and if you don't renew within your 12 months, they can terminate that lease and you can be gone. So I'm glad to know. Thank you for sharing that with your peers. So here's the important things in eviction prevention, and we're almost done. Eviction prevention is especially important when housing stock is limited. I think that's a real basic statement. We all know that. Don't get people evicted, or don't allow people to get into that eviction process, or let me rephrase that. Help people not get evicted so that you can keep a landlord, because there's not a lot of housing stock Educate everyone on rights and responsibilities. That goes back to that move-in packet. We're going to want to talk about it over and over and over and over and over again. Every time you have a visit with a client, maybe go over a portion of the lease or a portion of their rules and responsibilities. Being one of the things that we didn't say earlier when we were talking about your responsibilities to the 3 different categories, one of them is translation. You are learning how to translate for your clients. Like a lot of times you're that person in the middle that's helping moderate. You're a mediator. You're translating like, well, what I think my client is saying is this, and what I think the landlord is saying is this, and hey, I think we're saying the same thing. Let's just figure out how to fix it in the middle. Real important. It's making sure that we're staying out of eviction. Resources to address lease violations, back rent, cleanup. I think Dash was talking about they had some money. They have a fund that they can use to help with damages and do repairs and things like that. There are ways that different agencies advocate for that. There are different states that do it different ways. So if you want to have some more information about that, I've got some resources at the end, and we can talk about possibly how you get that little pot of extra money that helps you keep people from getting evicted. Regular ongoing communication with the landlord to catch up lease violations early. That is, remember from yesterday, the number one seller that you are doing when you're marketing your agency, even if you don't have a subsidy. Do y'all remember what I said? Landlords love knowing that someone is coming on site or someone is checking on that person and may be possible to catch things early. If you don't have a relationship with maybe your landlord or your property owner because they're in another state, make sure you know your maintenance people because they can also let you know what's happening before things get really, really bad. So that communication is key. So this is what we were talking about just a few minutes ago. Plans for how to socialize without disturbing neighbors, thinking outside the box, things like, keeping your clients and your parties to a minimum, wearing headphones instead of having everyone else listen to your particular brand of music, things like that, making sure that you have those communications with your clients to help them understand and not just thinking that they should know. Alternate strategies for substance use within the building. So what is the rule? Really quick, y'all, and then we got 5 minutes and we're done. What is the rule in Alaska for where you can smoke weed? So if you're leasing an apartment, you're not supposed to smoke weed in that apartment. Right, okay. So only if you own the property. Okay. So making sure that that's something that your clients know, especially if you've got a Housing First program, making sure that you have an alternative for where someone can go if they want to or if they are needing to use whatever their substance of choice is. That's got to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed honestly and openly from the beginning because that's a top trigger for people getting evicted, from what I have heard around the country. The engagement in meaningful and purposeful activity. We talked about that earlier. People who are engaged in their community are happier people. Happier people stay housed longer. Happier people don't get depressed and forget to pay their rent, lose their jobs, things like that. So making sure that you're providing information or helping people know what's available for them in their community that provides them with some community engagement is key. All right. So we got my questions and answers, but I went ahead and I put in some links for you guys around the Fair Housing Guidance, landlord-tenant laws, Fair Housing Project, Alaska Legal Services. Yes, ma'am. Go ahead you got a question for me. Yes, I'm sorry.
No, that's right. Hi, everyone. My name is Colleen Bickford. I'm with the Alaska Office of U.S. Housing and Urban Development. Probably everybody knows this, but I just want to make sure that you know the Alaska Legal Services Corporation is a local fair housing resource. They do the work for HUD here in Alaska. We provide them with grant funding to do things like outreach, education. They can help people file claims of discrimination. Sometimes they do testing. They're located around the state. They have offices as well as their main office in Anchorage. There's great information on their website. You can see a calendar. Sometimes they'll do targeted workshops for like veterans or divorce clinics or different kinds of things like that. They also do just general workshops in communities. We've worked with them to go around the state to do workshops and with the housing authorities and others to target people that wouldn't ordinarily come in. So if you have questions and wonder about compliance with the federal fair housing laws or civil rights laws or you know, that kind of thing, I'd encourage you to reach out to, again, Alaska Legal Services. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm sorry, I forgot at the beginning. She asked me yesterday to not forget to let her tell you guys about that, and I did forgot. So anyway, that's a great piece of information to have. Let me see, what did I do with my clicker? So also, I think I've told you this a couple of times, but it's that adult learner thing. We have a learning management system. I'm going to make sure that everybody who's signed up to be here for the past couple of days, that I'm able to get your contact information and make sure that all of you get the information for our learning management system and also for the PowerPoint that we've used here, the resources that we've talked about today. And I have a question for the group. The whole group is not here. How do you all feel about sharing your contact information with your peers who were here? So we got thumbs up, thumbs up, thumbs up. Okay, so most people usually feel okay about that. If I find, because I'm going to ask that question before I send out any resources or any of your specific contact information. I'll send out in my email, hey, does somebody have a problem with me sharing your information? And if somebody says no, then I won't share that information. Otherwise, you can plan on getting a list of all the people that you have met in the last couple of days. Maybe you knew everybody in the room, maybe you didn't, but you've all had the opportunity to learn from one another. And now you probably have, I think I heard from Brian, 125 people, 150 people, something like that, signed up for the last couple of days. So that's another 125 to 150 resources that you have for other information from people who are doing the same work as you. All right, so does anybody have any questions? I'm feeling pretty good about life. I'm only 15 minutes over, and I was told I could have an extra 15 minutes, so that went fairly well. Thank you guys so much. I think there might still be some activities at the end of the day. Maybe someone here knows what they are, and I don't. Don't see who might. Nope, there's not anymore. It's done. It's done, you guys. And it looks like it might have quit being so ugly out there. I don't know. Thank you so much for your time spent with me today. Please fill out your evaluation honestly and openly. I definitely want to know what your feelings are so that we can tailor this training in any ways that we need to that best help the community, okay?